We had light bulb moment when we were cooking bacon on the stove, and Esther's 5 pounds at our feet waiting for something to fall off of the stove, and I just was like, oh my gosh, like it just happened. It was like this bulb. It was a crazy moment, and we never ate meat after that point.
One of the worst practices ever developed on the planet was this consumption of other animals for food and using them for resources.
These things happen behind walls in these dark, horrible, stinky places where no one's allowed to enter.
I think people would not participate in violence against these animals if they saw the animals firsthand. I have no doubt about it.
Nothing serious is going to change until there's just a catastrophe that forces us to change, that we just realize that we're killing the planet.
There is a vision of the future that doesn't include the exploitation of animals.
Die Wachstumsraten sind so hoch wie in keiner Branche. Selbst Hightech und so kann mit uns im Moment nicht mithalten.
Das ist nicht nur ein Markt, das ist nicht nur irgendwas Kurzfristiges.
Jeder Fleischproduzent hat ein veganes Regal rausgeschoben. Guck mal, ich kann jetzt auch vegan.
Plant-based diets could reduce greenhouse gas emissions of up to 2/3, and 8 million lives could be saved.
Sanctuaries provide a sort of aspiration to the kind of world we could create.
Da ist jemand, der leben will.
This is the social justice movement of our times. It affects the most number of beings.
The initial goal is bringing as many non-human animals from the side of the things to the side of the persons.
Instead of domesticating animals, we're domesticating cells.
How could I choose something that came from a slaughtered animal if what my experience is the same?
I think it will eradicate traditional livestock and meat production.
Hi everyone, it's Robbie here. Really excited to introduce you to Mr. Mark Pierschel, the director of the new film, The End of Meat. We're really excited to talk about the launch of the film. It's happening here in the UK fairly soon, and we're going to go in and ask a bunch of questions and learn more about the film and Mark's motivations for making the film, his history and everything else. Welcome, Mark.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So before we start talking about the film and your history and being a filmmaker, let's talk about your history as a vegan. Like, how did you get into the movement and what was your vegan journey?
Okay, so I went vegetarian when I was 17, and then back then it was a bit harder to find out all these things, how animal products are being produced basically. So it was hard to get that information, and then a couple years later I watched the documentary called Baraka.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful film.
Yeah, love it. And there's a scene where they're debeaking chicks and they're sorting the male and the female chicks, and that just got me thinking, and I did some more research, which was a bit harder because the internet wasn't there and information wasn't readily available, but I looked into it and I decided to go vegan.
How have things changed in all these years that you've been vegan? I'm guessing, you've seen a massive shift in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was difficult being vegan at that time. It was around 2000 in Germany, so it was hard to get all these products. There were some, but I think my first tofu was in a glass, and I had no idea how to prepare it. So I was like, oh, this is not very tasty. But compared to now, it's just so much easier. Now there's such a variety of foods and there's so many cookbooks. It's so easy to look all this information up, and it makes it way easier for people to start now.
Absolutely, and Germany's definitely leading the way. I've been to Berlin a few times, and then you throw a stone and you hit a vegan cafe or a vegan restaurant. It's really inspiring.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something we look at in the film as well, just how this shift has happened in Berlin and how it changed so quickly from this term veganism that was known to almost no one before, and now it's like entered the mainstream and people are talking about it all the time.
And the film itself, do you want to give us, the audience, a bit of a background as to how the film came about and what was the kind of like the spark that brought the film to life?
Sure. So the idea was to explore how the world would look like if we stopped eating meat and animal products. And the idea came about when I was doing interviews for my previous film, Live and Let Live. And I always asked the question what people would think the world would look like in 20 years from now. And I got some really interesting answers. And then when the whole vegan idea took off in Germany about 8 years ago, I thought maybe this is more than just a trend. Maybe this is the beginning of a larger movement, and that got me starting the film.
And was this something that you did on your own, or were there people around you that were encouraging you to do it? Was it kind of like one of those aha moments?
Yeah, I was talking to friends about this idea and how there isn't really a perspective how a vegan world would actually look like, and there hasn't been done much research. So I thought it was really interesting to follow this as a documentary idea subject.
And you're an author as well. Tell us a little bit about the books that you've written.
Sure. So I wrote a cookbook in 2000 that was released in 2007, which is called Vegan Lecker Lecker, which is like one of the first vegan cookbooks in Germany, and it sold really well. And then it was just basically all my favorite recipes, and I put them together in this little book. So and it seemed to resonate with people. And then 3 years later, I wrote a basic introduction guide to veganism for new vegans, like talking about the ethics, how to go vegan, things to avoid, things to look out for, labels and all that stuff. And yeah, that's been selling really well as well.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And the film premiered last month in New York, is that right?
That was the US premiere. We had the Berlin premiere last year, and it was released in German theaters in September last year.
And how have people been responding to the film so far?
Yeah, it's been really positive. We've got lots of great feedback. People really seem to like that change of perspective, that it's a bit more positive outlook in the future, and just trying to imagine how a world like this could look like.
And the premiere is here on October 5th in the UK at View in Piccadilly. So if you're watching and you're in London, make sure you're there. Are there any tickets left?
No, it's sold out.
Oh, okay.
It's part of the Rain Dance Film Festival,
right.
And there's another screening on October 4th at 3 p.m. There's still some tickets available.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I'll put the links in the description for everyone if you want to purchase a ticket. So let's dive into the film, and let's just tell us about the kind of the narrative and the kind of the main things that you're trying to get across in this film when people watch it.
Sure. So we start with a bit of background, a bit of history on meat consumption, meat production, and just as an introduction for people who don't know that much about it. Yeah, and then we talk to undercover journalists. We talk to Joanne MacArthur.
She's amazing.
Yeah, and we talked to Timothy Patcheret, who went undercover in a slaughterhouse and wrote a book called Every 12 Seconds, and talked to Anita Krines, who started Toronto Pig Save, and just trying to get a picture of how this industry looks like and what the activists are discovering when they went undercover or when they do these kinds of activism. Mm-hmm. So we follow that, and then we go to Germany and kind of look back how this trend started, how it affected the early pioneers of the movement, like the Vegans and Tofu Town, two larger vegan companies in Germany. And then we also went to the largest meat fair in Frankfurt and talked to people there. And we see that veganism is a subject there as well. And then we move to health and environment, and then talk to people that are envisioning how a world like this would look like. So people who are running sanctuaries, artists, philosophers, Will Kimlicka and Sue Donaldson, who wrote the book Zoopolis, for example, which just really has been a huge influence to the film. And finally, the last chapter is biotech, or cultured meat, clean meat, and all kinds of different approaches to producing the products, the animal products we know, without the animals.
Incredible. And obviously, like, cultured meat features in the film. There's so many companies and organizations now that are springing up in this race, you could say, to get these products to market. In your kind of research and connecting with these people, how far away do you think we are from, a world that is fed by cultured meat?
Well, when I started the film, they said it was about 5 years until it would hit the market, and then when we finished the film until now, there's even more companies that have started researching and working on this. So we have Hampton Creek, which is now called Just in the US, and they've announced a product for this year. So I don't know how realistic that is, but because there's still regulations that have to be passed in the US before it can enter the market, and that seems to be a bit more difficult at the moment. But yeah, I think it's going to happen soon because so many companies are working on it and they have such huge investments. So I think we're going to see it rather sooner than later.
And what's quite interesting is obviously these products pose quite a viable alternative, a cheaper, a healthier, a more environmentally friendly alternative to what some call land meat, meat from animals. Industry, the animal agriculture industry is a multi-trillion pound, multi-trillion dollar industry worldwide. They're pushing back. They're starting to kind of, try and challenge these products by trying to change laws like they have in Europe, not allowing plant milks to be called milk. They don't want these products to be called meat. Do you think industry is so powerful, I guess, is the question. Do you think they're going to try and stop this movement of clean meat?
That was something I thought as well. But then we've seen companies like Tyson Foods in the US, or there's a large meat producer in Germany who have all invested in cultured meat. So I think that they're seeing that there's a slow change, and they're seeing that this new emerging technology can change their traditional model of producing meat. So I think that it's more the farmers who are scared right now because they're going to lose their jobs, or it's just going to change radically for them. But I think the companies who are also in Germany have released vegan and vegetarian products. For example, Rügenwalder Mühle, which is like the largest sausage producer in Germany, they are now have like 33% of their revenues are made through vegetarian and vegan products, which is like a huge number.
Yeah.
So I think it's slowly shifting, and I think meat companies are also shifting towards that direction.
And obviously, if this happens and we successfully get the world off animal agriculture, what kind of how do we see the world changing? Because that's the question, isn't it? What if we stopped eating meat? That's the question you ask in your film, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very broad question. So obviously there's a different there's so many perspectives to look at. And I think regarding numbers, one interesting study was done by the Oxford Martin School in 2016, and they say that a vegan diet globally could avert 8 million deaths by 2050, cut greenhouse gas emissions by the food sector about 2/3, and save $1.5 trillion in climate damages and healthcare related expenditures. So it would, of course, be huge savings for on an economic side. And of course, this is really crucial because there's going to be 10 billion people by 2050, so we have to look at some kind of options.
No, absolutely. I think, when you lay the numbers out and you look at all the data, it just makes sense, doesn't it? And this is what our job is as filmmakers and creatives and activists and advocates, is to take all this information, all these really dry and boring studies, and turn them into creative, interesting, engaging pieces of content. So the masses can look at it, or the governments and organizations can look at it and think, oh, wow, actually, these people are right. We're not just crazy, tree-hugging, mung bean munching hippies. We're actually people who really care about the future, and we want to see, a kinder, healthier, happier world.
Absolutely, yeah. And we also looked at what kind of incentives governments can take or make available. So like food labeling or taxing foods based on their ecological footprints. Those are some ways, and then making foods or vegetarian vegan alternatives more readily available for a larger percentage of the population.
Now, obviously, part of the expansion of this movement is it's all connected to food. Now, you said things have been growing in Germany rapidly with a lot of meat companies taking on vegetarian and vegan products. Do you see that trend continuing? worldwide? I mean, because I assume you've traveled and you've experienced different cultures. So are you seeing that shift growing? Because obviously here in the West, we're very lucky. We're in our little bubble where veganism seems to be expanding, but there is a whole other world out there. I mean, do you think the rest of the world is picking it up as well?
Well, we see the trend like in Germany growing to other countries as well across Europe. I think there's a slow growth happening there. But then again, we went to India to look at the situation there, and what we see is that the number of vegetarians is actually decreasing, because vegetarian is something that's been seen as very traditional. So the young generation, the millennials, they want to try meats and exotic meats. So that's obviously changing the situation a bit. And India is going to be the most populous country just in a few years. So it's going to have a huge effect on what's being consumed and what these consumption choices have on other countries as well. So, but there's also groups that are working on informing the public. There's a huge vegan movement growing there as well. So we see that the shift is happening there as well, just not as fast as it is here, probably.
And the film kind of also features kind of all kinds of educated people and people in kind of the scientific world. How important do you think the role is of kind of the scientific part of our movement, like people who are looking at the data? Because obviously at the moment, you know, our movement is very much focused on animal rights and the emotional side of things. But when it comes to science, which is health and nutrition, like how important do you think is that part of the conversation?
That's a good question. I think health is really important, because what I've learned when I looked at the development in Germany, it was the health aspect that got veganism into the mainstream. Because we had, I think it was 2-3 scandals of where they found horse meat in lasagna. That was a big thing. And then there was this discussion happening, and people started looking at veganism for like a healthier option. And then we saw the release of all these cookbooks, and that was what got veganism into the mainstream. And I think it wouldn't have been possible with just the ethical side.
Absolutely. We find the same here at Plant-Based News as well. A lot of the content that seems to engage people the most is things to do with nutrition and health and fitness, because I think it's a personal thing, isn't it? People feel a sense of connection with it because they read information, they learn about how these animal products can negatively affect their own bodies and their own health. And it's a lot easier for them to take it on, because, you know, to be fair, not everyone cares about animals, not everyone cares about the future and the environment. So sort of helping people understand that shifting to this lifestyle can have a really positive effect on us as people. I think, like you say, it's a good way of hooking people in, drawing them in, and then kind of like, you know, not secretly, but kind of like getting in the animal ethics message.
Yeah, I think it's just like a gradual change. When people get into this movement or get into the idea of veganism through health, then they will automatically look at the ethical side as well. And I think there's a study that found that people shift to more the ethical side. That's becoming more important to them once they look into it more.
I don't know if you're familiar with Salesh Rao. Have you heard of Salesh Rao? Climate Healers.
No.
So Salesh has a program called Vegan 2026, where he believes that we must make a vegan world by 2026, as in we must end animal agriculture by 2026. And it's an interesting idea, because he believes that if we don't do it after that, then we will have catastrophic shifts in our entire planet. He talks about humans being these kind of like heat regulators of the planet. We've kind of, you know, with our lifestyle, with animal agriculture and industry, we've warmed the planet to the point where we've maintained it in its current state. So we've avoided the ice age, you know, the last ice age. But, you know, animal agriculture is sort of taking us, factory farming mostly is taking us like way over the line. Are there any numbers or ideas around, you know, how much time have we got left before we actually, because this is Salesh's idea, but have you heard anyone talk about how you know, the clock, we're up against the clock, how much time have we got left really?
That's a good question. I think there's a study I read that the peak meat, like the point where meat production is sustainable for the planet, is long past that. So I think we're just going to see the consequences slowly building. Like in Germany, we see that with the level of nitrate in groundwater that's really a problem because of the feces of the factory farm production is growing, and they don't know where to put it. And we see that through the problem with insects. There's less and less insects, and that's because of the food production and the use of pesticides for growing feed crops for animals. And I think these are just two smaller examples for some things that are going to happen in the future that are showing that factory farming and the consumption of animals is catastrophic, and it's going to increase. And I think it's up to governments and to leaders to implement larger changes, that it's not just these industries that can do what they want.
Yeah, because it's a bit like a monster. Compassion in World Farming calls it the machine. They have this campaign where they talk about how the machine is just eating up and destroying everything. And it really is. It's kind of this monster that has, perhaps at the time they thought it was a good idea to make more meat, more cheaper meat, more affordable animal products. But ultimately the people that conceived this, I think, were really deluded, because I don't see how anyone could create a system like that that's so damaging and so cruel without consequences. And as the Buddhists talk about like cause and effect and karma, we've laid those stones down, and now we're reaping the benefits. We're reaping the effects of those terrible decisions. Obviously, things are changing so rapidly. I mean, with everything you've experienced making this film and your life, do you see a vegan world? Do you feel that in your heart that it is possible?
Well, when I started making the film, I was a bit more conservative about the idea, but then when I learned more about biotechnology and how fast these companies are growing and how far this idea has already progressed, that made me a bit more hopeful, I'd say, because I think when cultured meat enters the market at a price that is competitive to regular produced meats right now, I think it will radically change the market. And I think it's not just going to be vegans that are going to help us shift. I think it's the flexitarians, the people that are actively reducing their meat consumption, because that's what's driving the growth of the plant-based meats and the cultured meats in the future. So I think that's really the key to helping people shift and change to a plant-based diet.
Let's talk a little bit about animals themselves. Now, obviously, as vegans, we care about animals because we don't want to see them suffer for our pleasure. Why do you think it's so difficult for many people to see animals as individuals? Because ultimately we grow up and we're brought up in a world where animals are not seen as individuals, they're seen as a commodity.
I think it's just because of the separation, because people don't really have to deal with farmed animals anymore. I mean, it's a factory farm. People don't ever look into a factory farm and then they transport it to the slaughterhouse. So the only time people are going to see these animals is when they're on a transport truck somewhere on the road to the slaughterhouse. So I think there's this alienation from farmed animals, and people don't really see them for what they really are. And then we have examples like Esther the Wonder Pig, which is also in the film, that radically changes people's perception, because you see this animal in this household and together with dogs and cats, and you see that she isn't really any different from dogs and cats. And I think examples like that help people change their perception, their view of farmed animals.
Definitely. And obviously being an advocate, like, what are your thoughts on the most effective ways we can advocate for animals? Because there's so many different ways in which we can do it, but are there, in your opinion, more effective ways?
Well, I think leading by example is probably the best way to go. I've tried some different approaches over the years, but I think that's what works most effectively. That you show people that this lifestyle really is nothing different if you take a little time and get into the basics and the structure. And it's just so much more compassionate. And when people see what their consumption choices are, or what's behind their consumption choice, it really makes them afraid that they don't want to change, and they also don't want to see the images from slaughterhouse and from factory farms or animal cruelty. They're trying to avoid that. So I think it really helps to be gentle in the approach and show them, okay, here, this is veganism. It tastes really good. It's available everywhere, so there's no need to hide from it.
Amazing. And one of the things that we all struggle with on a daily basis is with seeing so much suffering. We are people who care as vegans. That's why we're vegan. We feel a compassionate connection with the earth and every creature on it, from every fly to every bird. You know, we want to treat all animals with respect. But sometimes when we see this suffering, we see the way animals are treated, you know, and also our fellow human beings, it's very difficult to remain positive and feel a sense of hope. Like, how do you, on a daily basis, maintain a sense of hope that humanity is moving in the right direction?
That's a good question. I mean, I have to admit, I live in a sort of a vegan bubble, so... And maybe that's necessary, because if you really look at the numbers and you see animal transport trucks just driving past my office every day, so it's really hard not to become depressed about it, because there's just so much suffering going on. And I think it's really important to focus on, the slow victories we've gained over the years, and that there is a hopeful future, and that it helps people to look at the positive side. And that's something I tried with the film as well, because there's already so many documentaries that focus on the negative aspects of it, and I just wanted to show that there's a positive side to it all, the positive future of veganism and plant-based nutrition.
And with human beings, do you think, here's a question for you about us as people, as creatures, do you think compassion is innate within us, or do you think that's something that we have to learn as people? Do you think we have to be taught it?
I think it's something we grow up when we're kids. I mean, I certainly was compassionate towards animals when I grew up, but then I learned that, it's okay to eat these animals. For example, I grew up with rabbits. My dad was a rabbit breeder, so I used to play with the rabbits, and then on Sundays I used to eat them. And I thought, okay, this is just how it has to be. And I never really questioned that until I was 17. So I think, education again is a very important part of it. And I think trying to educate kids about this, going to schools with school programs, talking about veganism and our relationship to animals is something that's really helping a lot. And I hope that's something that's being that we see more of in the future.
At that age of 17, what shifted in your mind that kind of helped you see beyond the carnistic kind of like conditioning that you had?
So I grew up in a rural area, so it was hard to get exposed to new ideas. And then I got into punk rock music, political punk rock music, and that was something that when I read the lyrics, I was like, wow, there's all these ideas that I didn't know anything about, and then I looked into it more, and then I decided to go vegetarian. This is the incredible thing about art and music and culture and film, and how it can inspire people to make changes in their lives. If there are people out there who are watching who want to get involved in making films or creating art, and as a creative person yourself, have you got any advice for people as to where to begin? Well, I don't have an education in filmmaking, so I'm a self-taught filmmaker, and I think it's just important that when you have an idea, you follow through with it. Don't let anyone tell you can't make a movie just because you don't have a background. It's just, if you're passionate about something, then try to achieve it no matter at what cost. I think it's easy. Technology is becoming more readily available. It's way more easier to make film than it was a couple years back. So, Are there any points in the film that really stand out to you that you feel like you really want people to take away from that when they leave the cinema? I think what was also important in the film is sanctuaries, because we went to a few different sanctuaries in the US, Germany, and in the UK, and just to look at how farmed animals can live together with humans in the future. And I think it really helps people who are passionate about animals to go there and see animals not in like a factory farm or in a slaughterhouse, but in an environment where they're happy and they can interact with other animals and live out their lives the way they are meant. So I would say that, yeah, if you're an activist, if you're passionate about animals, go to a sanctuary and connect with the animals. It really helps sustain your activism, and it's, yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, we know Mark from Friend Animal Sanctuary down in Kent. He's a wonderful man. He's going to be at the Q&A here in London. Tell us a little bit about Mark and their sanctuary.
It was nice to see Mark again, because the first time I went to his sanctuary was in 2004 or 2005, I think. And it was just so nice to go back and see how it had changed in terms of the animals, that there's so many more animals now, and how he's caring for them, and that there's all this new generation of people, because back then it was more like the older activists who were involved in animal rights activism, and now there's all these young vegan activists who are doing the Save movement and Anonymous for the Voiceless. And yeah, it's just, I thought it made me really hopeful that there's this new generation who are pushing this movement so much right now.
Right, it's been incredible. I mean, I've only been vegan for 6 years, so not that long, and I've seen things rapidly shift and change. I mean, what do you think's driving this change so quickly? Are there any things that you've noticed that have kind of shifted it? Because, in the UK, we've gone from 200,000 vegans 10 years ago to something like 3.2 million potentially now in the UK. What do you think's caused this rapid increase?
Well, I think probably the information age, that information travels a lot faster through the use of the internet, and we see that with groups like the Save movement, who are doing vigils at transport trucks in front of the slaughterhouse, and they take these images and they spread them so quickly through Instagram and Facebook and social media. So that's been a huge help, and I think millennials, they're more open to new ideas, so they don't want to, continue the tradition of their parents, in terms of food, and also in terms of where their food is being produced. So they're asking more questions, and they want more sustainable alternatives. So I think that's what's really driving the movement. Millennials that are open to these new ideas, and they don't want to keep using or eating animals.
It's great. It's so inspiring to see. I mean, every day I'm getting emails and messages from people, friends and family who I'd never think would go vegan or even consider it, who come to me and say, oh, that strange thing you do where you just eat plants. Can you tell me a bit more about it? Even my own parents, who are in their 60s now, have gone vegan. They did veganuary. And it was just, in January they did veganuary. I've kind of been gently pushing them over the last few years, not being anything too extreme. And then my father told me that he'd gone vegan, and I laughed. I thought, you're joking. This is a joke, right? And he said, no. He said, I'm so vegan, I talk to the ants.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah, and he's even started his own vegan yogurt company.
Really? Wow.
All in the space of like 4 months. And he's so passionate about it. He's proper level 10 vegan. Hi, I'm Colin. I'm a vegan kind of person.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, so it does give me hope for the future, because if my father, this steak-eating farmer, can go vegan, anyone can.
Apparently there's another film by, it's called 73 Cows by Alex Lockwood, who's also screening at Raindance, which is the story of a farmer who sent all his cows to Hillside Sanctuary and then turned his farm into an vegan organic farm.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate your time. I'm super excited to see this film here in the UK.
Yeah, and the film's going to be available in the UK on iTunes and Amazon around November, I think. So
amazing. How can people get in touch with you and follow you on Twitter, Instagram, etc.?
The website is theendofmeat.com, and on Facebook, we're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and it's at End of Meat, and the hashtag is End of Meat, and the handle is at the End of Meat.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was really great to talk to you.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'll be putting links from the conversation in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and please do subscribe to more plant-based news. Thanks very much.